Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about how student media will save the urban student. And first I want to play a little game that me and my friends like to play. It's called Where Were You When? And it's just talking about seminal moments in history. And it's kind of funny because we all have personal experiences when we have a moment in history. So we'd ask questions like, where were you when Obama was elected as the first black president of the United States of America? Or where were you when the first plane crashed into the North Twin Tower? For my parents, they would play, where were you when John F. Kennedy was shot? For Biola students, we would ask, where were you when the entire campus went into lockdown mode because someone thought that there was an angry man with a gun, when in reality it was a confused film student with a tripod? For journalists, we would ask, where were you when you learned about Woodward and Bernstein, Mary Beth Tinker, Steve Glass, how to file a PRA, and the Freedom of Information Act? I remember exactly where I was sitting when I learned about the Freedom of Information Act. I was in my 6th period journalism class in high school, and my professor or my teacher told us, he said, you can walk into a courthouse or a police station and you can request information and they have to give it to you. Like, you don't have to be a professional or an adult. You can just walk in, and that was so empowering to me because as a high school student, you have to have a bathroom pass to leave the classroom, and there's people watching you during lunch so that you and your friends don't do anything crazy, and you get a phone call home if you're late from school. And so I would feel so maintained and managed in my high school setting, and then I would go into the journalism classroom at the end of the day and I was empowered, and I was learning about truth and social justice and all the things I could do and all the freedoms I did have. And today I want to talk to you guys about why journalism is so important for not just any student, but for the urban student in particular. Next year I have received a teaching post with Teacher America at Manual Arts High School in downtown LA. Here's a picture of Manual Arts. I found out 2 days ago that I got the job, so it's really exciting. And I'm going to be teaching special education, and they asked me to be their journalism advisor, so I'm going to be doing that as well. And this presentation is dedicated to my students, and my dream is that the Freedom of Information Act becomes a seminal moment in the lives of many more high schoolers, because I believe that it is empowering and it's teaching high schoolers about who they are as adults. And I want to give you a little bit of a picture of Manual Arts. I think it's a really good random sampling of what a high school in an urban community is like. So California State English proficiency is 44%. Manual Arts is coming in at a whopping 16% for English proficiency. California State standards for math proficiency is 33%. Manual Arts, 5%. Graduation rate across the state, 81%. Manual Arts, 79%. Eligibility to get into a UC or a Cal State is 42%. Students at Manual Arts are coming in at 39%. And I think that this is a picture of a lot of urban schools across the nation. It is failing. And I want you to think about and strategize and empathize with me as we think about these urban kids sitting in these classrooms, failing in a failing school. Ta-Nehisi Coates is, he's a writer and a journalist, and he writes for The Atlantic, and he talks a lot about what it means to be a black man in America, and he had a really bad experience growing up in an urban education, and this is what he said, and I think this is a picture of our urban student that we're talking about today. He says in this article about, he entitles School as Wonder or Way Out, he says, I failed repeatedly until somewhere around 11, somewhere around my son's age, I internalized it all. Thus prophecy came to fulfill itself until years later, as a college dropout, I would lie alone asking myself, what is wrong with me? I know better now, but once you've internalized your failures, the bitterness remains at the back of the mouth. And so I'm wondering, what are we doing for kids like Ta-Nehisi Coates lying awake at night wondering? And I think journalism answers this question for the urban student in 3 ways. Number one, I think it builds confidence. And the Freedom of Information Act is a really good example of this. It's teaching students that they deserve to know things, that their voice matters, that they can walk in and be American citizens and have rights. I sat down for this presentation and talked to Leandro Otero. He works for Teach for America, and he was a journalism teacher and an English teacher in Philadelphia in 2011. And I asked him, what about journalism did your urban students really like? And he said this quote, My students would get really excited about learning when they felt like they were learning about something they shouldn't be exposed to. They felt like you were treating them like an adult. And I think that's so true, right? We want to know the information and know secrets, and I think it's extremely dignifying for students to think that they're gathering information that they shouldn't be exposed to. And I think student press and student media is a really safe and controlled and good way to help students ask the hard questions. Other ways that it builds confidence includes diverse learning opportunities. And the way that I like to think about this is broadcast and newspaper and student magazines and yearbook. They give students a lot of options to be smart. So we've got artists and photographers and editors and writers, and we've got social media fanatics and computer nerds and just strong guys that can hold broadcast cameras on their shoulders for a long time. All these students get to contribute. All these students are smart. So an urban student walks into a publication and they have a lot to offer, and their voice matters, and they're an American citizen, not just a student. It builds confidence. Number 2, students get to serve as a school watchdog. In my dream world, there's no prior restraint, so students can report on their administration. The Student Press Law Center is a really cool place. It is a group of lawyers and advocates for student journalists to maintain their journalistic rights on school campuses. And Frank Lamont, who is the executive director of SPLC, says if students are forbidden to tell the public about a school's shortcomings, who will? And I think that's a really good insight to who better to make an urban school better than the urban student. And when a student starts to think to themselves, hey, what I have to say matters, and I can report on my principal, it changes the way that they think about their education, because now instead of thinking that they're part of a broken system, they're thinking my administrators owe something to me. I get to find out what they're doing with their money and how they're making decisions. My education matters, and I have a voice in my education. And I wonder if Ta-Nehisi Coates, as a young boy, how he would have changed his view of himself if he would have thought not that he was broken, but that his system was broken. I think that would have fundamentally changed the way he thought about himself. And so I think that the SPLC and what we're doing as serving as school watchdogs is keeping students accountable and making them keep their administrators accountable in really good, important ways. And number 3, third reason, it says number 1, but it's number 3, that I think that it's important, this is the most important point I'm going to make, is that the student press can develop thoughtful content creators. So Monica Ganis, she's a professor of theater and screenwriting at Azusa Pacific University, and she wrote this book entitled Under the Influence: California's Intoxicating Spiritual and Cultural Impact on America. And essentially what the book is about is how California defines, because it's a cultural hub, it defines a lot of what's going on in the world. And social scientists, and Monica Ganis herself says that high school students are really setting the trends for what we're doing in culture, which is unsurprising, right? They kind of set the trend of why Instagram's popular and what clothes to wear and what music to listen to. But what's more interesting that Ganis goes on to say is that there is a localized group of high school students that are making the most important cultural decisions. And she says that this is from the tip of Los Angeles to the bottom of Disneyland, which is us. It's our students, our brothers and sisters, our children, the kids we go to church with. Like, these are the main group that social scientists and culture makers and film producers and music producers, these kids are being watched, they're being stalked on social media, they're being surveyed, because they're the ones in the cultural hub of Los Angeles that are making important decisions. And so my question is, why are we taking away these kids' phones? Why aren't we teaching them how to use their phones? They are the most influential people in America, and they're right here in our backyard. Why aren't we teaching them how to be thoughtful and meaningful content creators? Because whether we like it or not, they're creating content, and we need to teach them how to do that well. And I believe so deeply that the high school journalism classroom is the best place to teach a kid how to make meaningful content. I think that it teaches them how to think better. It gives them the conviction that their voice is deeply important. And yeah, I think that we should not be robbing our students and shaming them for having phones, but we should be empowering them to make a difference with their phones. So, I'm going to read you guys a quote about what good journalism is. I'm actually going to start with a quote about what good education is, and then I'm going to read what good journalism is, and we're going to try to bridge this gap. So Mike Rose says what good education is. Good education helps us make sense of the world and find our way in it. Now, this is a quote from a blog. It was a review of Spotlight. You guys know that movie with the Boston Globe and those great journalists. And so this reviewer says that this movie did a really good job showing what journalists were supposed to be. And this is what this reviewer says about good journalism. He says, good journalism usually begins with a question, something that doesn't make sense. Reporters begin with a premise and then gather facts that support or contradict their hypothesis. The best journalists follow those facts without fear or favor. Spotlight's reporters slowly build their case with each new lurid revelation. Nothing comes easily. Mike Rose says a good education helps us make sense of the world. The journalism quote says, a story usually begins with a question. Something doesn't make sense. How are we not bridging this gap between journalism and education? I think that there are deep connections, and that if we thought about it more and we funded it more and we got more people passionate about journalism, education, and student media, the urban students' view of themselves in their communities and as Americans would deeply change. And so to conclude, I want to go back to my original game with a couple different questions for you guys, because obviously, if you can tell, this is not just a fun thing I'm interested in. This is my passion. So my first question is, what will you say? What will you say the next time you see a high schooler on their phone? Will you empower them, encourage them, or will you shame them? What will you feel the next time you take a wrong left turn down a ghetto neighborhood and you end up in front of Manual Arts High School? I hope you are afraid, not for yourself, but for my students and their future. And where will you stand in this conversation on education equity and good journalism? Because we need you. Thank you.